Elena's heart ran through the trees, with her heart slamming against her ribs, branches tearing at her sleeves, her breath coming out in sharp white clouds under the cold night sky. Something was behind her. She did not know what it was, only that it moved faster than any person should be able to move, and that every time she looked back, she saw nothing but darkness pressing in between the trunks, as if the forest itself had teeth. She had left her sister's house only 20 minutes earlier, taking the shortcut through the woods because the main road was closed for repairs. She had walked this path 100 times before, in daylight, with music playing through her earphones and her mind on ordinary things like grocery lists and unfinished emails. Tonight the path felt different. The air smelled wrong, sharp and metallic, and the usual sounds of night birds and rustling leaves had gone completely silent, as though every living thing nearby had already fled. She heard it before she saw it. A low growl, deep enough that she felt it in her chest more than her ears. She spun around, and there, between two old oak trees, stood a shape that her mind refused to accept. It was enormous, taller than any dog she had ever seen, with fur the color of wet ash, and eyes that caught the moonlight in a way no animal's eyes should. For one frozen second, she and the creature simply stared at each other. Then it moved. Elena screamed and ran, her shoes slipping on wet leaves, her lungs burning with the cold air. She did not think about direction or safety. She thought only about distance, about putting as much space as possible between herself and those eyes. Behind her she heard the creature crashing through the undergrowth, closing the gap with terrifying ease. She tripped over a root and went down hard, her palms scraping against stone and dirt. She twisted onto her back, just in time to see the creature leap. There was a burst of pain in her shoulder, sharp and blinding, and then everything blurred into a haze of cold ground and spinning stars. She tried to call for help, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. The last thing she remembered was the shape of the creature pulling back, almost as if startled by something, before the world went completely dark. When morning came, the woods were quiet again, as though nothing unusual had ever happened there. Frost clung to the grass, and pale light filtered weakly through the bare branches overhead. It was in this stillness that a group of riders moved silently along the tree line, their horses' breath rising in soft clouds, their eyes scanning the ground with the practiced focus of people who knew exactly what they were looking for. At the front of the group rode a man whose presence seemed to command the very air around him. He was tall, with dark hair pulled back from a sharp, composed face, and eyes so pale gold that they seemed to glow faintly even in daylight. His name was Kane, and though he wore simple traveling clothes with no crown or symbol of rank, everyone in his company treated him with the quiet, absolute respect reserved for someone whose word was law. He was the ruler of Ashbourne, a territory hidden deep within these old forests, home to a community that outsiders could never guess existed. Kane raised a hand, and the riders behind him stopped at once. He had caught a scent, faint but unmistakable, carried on the morning wind. Blood, human blood, mixed with something else, something that made the fine hairs on the back of his neck rise. He dismounted without a word, and walked forward on foot, following the scent through a break in the trees. He found her lying at the base of a small hill, half covered by fallen leaves, so still that for a terrible moment he thought she was already gone. Her dark hair was tangled with dirt and twigs, and a torn line of fabric on her jacket revealed a wound on her shoulder that should not have looked the way it did. The edges of the bite were already changing, taking on a strange, faint shimmer beneath the torn skin, unlike anything he had seen on an ordinary human before. He knelt beside her and checked for breath. Faint, but there. Her pulse fluttered weakly beneath his fingers, and her skin was far too cold. Behind him, one of his companions, a broad-shouldered man named Felix, arrived at a run and stopped short at the sight. "Rogue attack," Felix said quietly, crouching to examine the wound without touching it. "Looks recent, maybe a few hours." Kane did not answer immediately. He was studying the bite mark, and something about it unsettled him in a way he could not fully explain. A rogue bite on a human almost always ended one of two ways. Either the person died from the shock and blood loss before anything else could happen, or the bite simply failed to take, leaving behind nothing more than a scar, and a story no one would ever believe. What he was looking at now was neither of those things. The wound was healing, slowly but visibly, in a rhythm that no human body should have been capable of on its own. "We cannot leave her here," Kane said finally, his voice low and even. If a rogue did this deliberately, this was no accident. Someone crossed a boundary they should not have crossed. Felix frowned. She is human, Kane. If we bring her back and something goes wrong, the council will have questions we cannot easily answer. I am aware of that, Kane said, already lifting her carefully into his arms. Her weight was slight, and she stirred faintly against him, a small sound escaping her lips that was not quite a word. Something in her breath, in the erratic flutter of her pulse, told him that whatever was happening inside her body was only just beginning. He was not willing to leave that unanswered, not with a rogue still loose in his territory, and a human, whose blood no longer behaved like an ordinary human's blood. They rode back to Ashbourne in silence, the morning sun rising higher and casting long shadows across the frost-covered fields as they crossed into the hidden valley that few outsiders ever saw. The stronghold rose ahead of them, a cluster of solid stone buildings built into the hillside, smoke curling from chimneys, the early bustle of a community already awake and moving through its daily routines. Guards at the gate straightened at the sight of their king carrying an unconscious stranger, but none of them dared to ask questions aloud. They simply opened the way and let him pass. The healer's quarters were located in the lower level of the main hall, a long room lined with shelves of dried herbs, glass jars, and neatly folded linens. The healer, a sharp-eyed woman named Lyra, was already awake and preparing her morning tools when Kane arrived with Elena in his arms. She took one look at the wound, and her expression shifted from mild curiosity to focused urgency. "Put her here," Lyra said, gesturing to a low bed near the window where the light was strongest. She moved quickly, cutting away the torn fabric around the wound with practiced hands, murmuring softly to herself as she worked. Kane stood back, arms crossed, watching every movement with the stillness of someone forcing himself to remain calm. "This is not a normal bite," Lyra said after a long moment, glancing up at him. "The pattern is wrong. Even in a fresh turn, the body fights the change for hours before anything settles. Hers is already settling. Look here, along the edge." She turned Elena's shoulder gently so Kane could see. Beneath the torn skin, faint lines had begun to form, pale and silvery, almost like frost spreading across glass. Kane had lived a very long life and had seen countless bites, countless transformations, countless failures. He had never seen anything quite like this. "Keep her stable," he said quietly. "I want to know everything you find, as soon as you find it." Lyra nodded, already reaching for a cloth soaked in something that smelled faintly of mint and something sharper beneath it. "And what do I tell the council when they ask why the Alpha King personally carried an unconscious human through the front gate?" Kane's jaw tightened slightly, though his voice remained even. "Tell them I found something on our land that concerns the safety of our territory, and I intend to understand it before anyone else gets involved." He left the healer's quarters and walked out into the open courtyard, where Felix was waiting, with a look that suggested he had already guessed what was coming. "You want me to find the rogue," Felix said. "I want you to find out how a rogue got close enough to our borders to attack anyone at all," Kane replied. "And I want to know why he did not finish what he started. A rogue does not simply lose interest halfway through a kill." "Unless something interrupted him," Felix offered. "Or unless he wanted her to live," Kane said, his gaze drifting toward the healer's quarters. "Either possibility troubles me equally." Felix studied his king for a long moment, noting something unfamiliar in his expression, something that went beyond simple duty or curiosity. He said nothing about it, only nodded and turned to gather a search party, leaving Kane standing alone in the courtyard, with the weight of a decision he had not yet fully made. Inside the healer's quarters, Elena's eyes fluttered without opening, her body caught somewhere between sleep and waking, her mind drifting through fragments of memory that made no sense to her. She saw the shape of the creature in the trees, felt again the burst of pain in her shoulder, and beneath all of it, strange and impossible, she felt something new stirring inside her, a heat spreading slowly through her veins that had nothing to do with fever. Outside, the sun climbed higher over Ashbourne, and the day moved forward as though nothing unusual had happened, though everyone within those walls who had seen the king carry a stranger through the gates understood that something had shifted, quietly and irreversibly, the moment he chose to bring her home, instead of leaving her behind. By midday, whispers had already begun to spread through the lower halls of the stronghold, carried from servant to guard to kitchen worker. each version of the story growing slightly stranger than the last. Some said the king had found a spy, others said he had found a witch. A few, closer to the truth than they realized, said he had found someone the old prophecies had warned them about, though none of them could quite remember the details of those prophecies well enough to explain what they meant. Cain ignored the whispers as best he could, though he was aware of them the way a man is aware of a storm gathering on the horizon, distant but unmistakably approaching. He spent the early afternoon in his study, going through old records his family had kept for generations, searching for any mention of a bite that behaved the way Elena's did. Most of what he found was useless, old superstition, mixed with half-remembered legend, but one passage caught his attention and held it. It spoke of a bloodline untouched by ordinary transformation, a human whose body would not reject the bite nor fully embrace it, but instead would carry something entirely new. The passage was old, faded, and frustratingly incomplete, ending mid-sentence, where the page itself had crumbled away with age. He closed the book slowly, staring at the fire crackling in the hearth, and allowed himself, just for a moment, to consider the possibility that the woman sleeping in his healer's quarters was not simply an unlucky victim who had wandered into the wrong stretch of forest at the wrong time. Whatever she was about to become, he understood, deep in the part of himself that rarely spoke but was never wrong, that her presence in Ashbourne would change more than just her own life. Late in the evening, Lyra sent word that Elena's fever had spiked and that she was beginning to stir. Cain rose immediately, setting the old book aside, and made his way back through the quiet halls toward the healer's quarters, his expression carefully composed, even as something unfamiliar tightened in his chest with every step. Whatever answers waited for him there, he intended to face them directly, without hesitation, the same way he faced every threat and every mystery that crossed into his territory. But as he pushed open the door and saw her turning restlessly beneath the blankets, her face pale and damp with sweat, her lips moving around words that made no sound, he found himself hesitating anyway, caught for the first time in longer than he could remember, by something that felt far less like duty, and far more like the beginning of something he had never expected to find. He crossed the room and sat in the wooden chair beside the bed, the one Lyra had clearly placed there for exactly this purpose. Up close, he could see the fine tremor running through Elena's hands, the way her fingers curled and uncurled against the blanket, as though she were trying to hold on to something that kept slipping away. Lyra stood at the foot of the bed, mixing a pale green paste in a small stone bowl, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Her body temperature keeps rising and falling," Lyra said without looking up. "It is not behaving like a fever from infection. It is behaving like something is negotiating inside her, deciding what to become." Cain did not answer at once. He watched Elena's face, the small furrow between her brows, the way her lips parted slightly, as though she wanted to speak, but could not find the words. There was something achingly human about her distress, and yet beneath it, faint but growing stronger by the hour, he could sense the same shift in her scent that he had noticed in the forest, a change that had nothing to do with fear or pain, and everything to do with something ancient waking up inside her. "Will she survive the night?" he asked quietly. Lyra set the bowl down and finally met his eyes. "I believe so. Whatever this is, her body is not fighting it the way a normal turn would fight it. It is almost as if the change already belongs to her, and it is simply remembering itself." Cain absorbed this in silence, turning the words over in his mind. He thought of the old book in his study, the torn page, the incomplete sentence about a bloodline that would carry something new. He thought of the rogue who had attacked her, and then, for reasons still unknown, had stopped short of finishing what he had started. Nothing about this felt like coincidence. A soft sound pulled his attention back to the bed. Elena's eyes had opened, unfocused and glassy, darting around the unfamiliar room in confusion, before landing, briefly, on him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Her breathing quickened, panic flooding into her expression, as the reality of her surroundings began to register through the haze of fever. "Where?" she managed, her voice barely more than a rasp. "Where am I?" "You are safe," Cain said, keeping his voice low and steady, the same tone he used to calm frightened animals and frightened soldiers alike. "You were hurt in the forest. We brought you somewhere you can heal." Her eyes searched his face, wide with fear and confusion, and he could see her trying to make sense of him, of the room, of the strange ache spreading through her shoulder and down her arm. She tried to sit up and immediately winced, a small gasp escaping her as pain flared through the wound. "Do not move too quickly," Lyra said gently, stepping closer. "You have been through a great deal. Let your body rest." Elena's gaze flicked between the two of them, taking in Lyra's calm authority and Kane's unreadable composure, and something in her expression shifted from confusion toward a deeper, more instinctive fear, the kind that comes from sensing danger without being able to name it. She pulled back against the pillows, as though putting distance between herself and both of them. "What happened to me?" she whispered. "What attacked me?" Kane hesitated. He had faced down enemy packs, negotiated treaties with rival territories, made decisions that determined the fate of hundreds of lives, and yet in this moment, faced with the simple honesty of her question, he found himself uncertain how much truth she could bear to hear so soon. "We are still trying to understand exactly what happened," he said carefully. "What matters right now is that you are safe, and that we will help you through whatever comes next." Elena's eyes filled with tears she did not let fall, her jaw tightening with the effort of holding herself together in front of two strangers in an unfamiliar room. Kane recognized that particular kind of strength, the refusal to break down in front of people whose intentions were not yet trusted, and something about it settled deeper into him than he expected. "I want to go home," she said quietly. "You will," Kane said, though even as the words left his mouth he was not entirely certain they were true. "First, you need to heal. And there are things about what happened to you that we need to understand together, for your sake as much as ours." She did not respond, only closed her eyes again, exhaustion pulling her back under, despite the fear still evident in the lines of her face. Lyra busied herself checking the wound once more, her expression thoughtful, while Kane remained seated beside the bed long after Elena had drifted back into uneasy sleep, watching the faint silver lines beneath her skin pulse gently in rhythm with her breathing, like something patient and ancient, counting down toward a moment none of them were fully prepared for. Word of the stranger reached the council chamber before the sun had fully set. 3 senior members of Ashbourne's ruling circle gathered in the great hall, their voices low but urgent, as they debated what Kane's decision meant for the territory. Among them was a sharp-featured woman named Mara, whose family had long held influence within the pack and who watched every move Kane made, with careful, calculating attention. "He brought a human into the stronghold without council approval," Mara said, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Whatever his reasons, this sets a precedent we cannot ignore." An older man beside her, gray at the temples and steady in his bearing, shook his head slowly. "Kane has never made a reckless decision in the years he has ruled us. If he brought her here, he had cause." "Cause or not," Mara replied, "if word spreads beyond these walls that a human bitten by a rogue is being sheltered inside our territory, it will draw attention we cannot afford. Attention from rival packs, from human authorities, from every faction that has been waiting for an excuse to challenge his rule." The third council member, a quiet woman with silver-streaked hair, spoke for the first time. "Or it will draw attention from something far older than rival politics. I have heard whispers of the bloodline prophecy before, though I never expected to see it spoken of seriously in my lifetime." Mara's eyes narrowed. "Superstition has no place in council decisions." "Perhaps not," the older man said calmly, "but neither does dismissing something simply because it is inconvenient. I suggest we wait and observe before we act rashly ourselves." Their debate continued long into the evening, circling the same questions without resolution, while outside the great hall, guards patrolled the perimeter with heightened alertness, aware that a rogue wolf capable of crossing so deep into Ashbourne's territory without detection represented a danger that could not be ignored, regardless of what the council decided about the woman he had left behind. Felix returned near midnight, his expression grim, as he made his way toward Kane's private study. He found the king still awake, standing at the window overlooking the dark tree line, his posture rigid with the particular stillness that Felix had learned, over many years of service, meant Kane was thinking through something that troubled him deeply. "We found tracks," Felix said without preamble, large, fast, moving in a pattern that suggests he knew exactly where our patrol routes were. "This was not a random encounter, Kane. Someone planned this." Kane did not turn from the window immediately. "Did the tracks lead anywhere useful?" "They led to the old boundary stones near the eastern ridge, then vanished. Whoever this rogue is, He knows the terrain well enough to disappear without a trace. That kind of knowledge does not come from an outsider passing through. Cain finally turned, his golden eyes catching the low firelight in a way that made Felix pause. Some old instinct, recognizing the weight behind that gaze, even after years of familiarity with it. You believe he had help from within our own borders. I believe it is worth considering, Felix said carefully. And I believe you should consider it too, before you decide how much trust to place in anyone close to you right now. Cain held his second's gaze for a long moment, the unspoken warning settling between them like a stone dropped into still water. He thought of the council already gathering to question his judgment, of Mara's sharp eyes and careful ambition, of the strange prophecy buried in an old crumbling book, and of the woman sleeping fitfully in the healer's quarters, unaware that her arrival in Ashbourne had already begun to shift the balance of power within its walls. Keep searching, he said finally, and say nothing of this to the council until we know more. If someone within our own territory helped that rogue reach her, I want to know who, before they realize we are already looking. Felix nodded once and left without another word, closing the study door quietly behind him. Alone again, Cain turned back to the window, his gaze drifting toward the healer's quarters across the courtyard, where a single lamp still burned faintly behind the curtains, and he found himself wondering, not for the first time that night, exactly how much danger had walked into his territory alongside the woman he had chosen, against every instinct of caution, to save. The days that followed blurred together for Elena in a haze of fever dreams and brief moments of clarity, each one stranger than the last. She woke sometimes to sunlight, sometimes to darkness, always to the same dull ache pulsing beneath her collarbone, spreading slowly through her body, like ink dropped into water. Lyra was almost always nearby, adjusting bandages, mixing new remedies, watching her with the careful attention of someone studying a puzzle she had not yet solved. On the third day, the fever finally broke. Elena woke with a clearer head than she had managed since the attack, though her body still felt heavy and unfamiliar, as though she had been rearranged slightly while she slept, and had not yet adjusted to the new shape of herself. She pushed herself up against the pillows, testing the strength in her arms, and noticed immediately that lifting herself required far less effort than it should have. "You are healing quickly," Lyra said from across the room, not looking up from the herbs she was sorting. "Faster than anyone I have treated in a long time." Elena touched her shoulder carefully, feeling the raised edge of the wound beneath her fingertips, no longer raw and burning, but smooth, in a way that unsettled her more than pain would have. "What is happening to me?" she asked, her voice steadier now than it had been in days. "Please, I need to understand." Lyra set down the herbs and crossed the room, pulling the wooden chair closer to the bed, and sitting with the unhurried patience of someone who had explained difficult truths many times before. "What I am about to tell you will sound impossible," she said. "I ask only that you listen fully before you decide whether to believe it." Elena nodded slowly, bracing herself. "The creature that attacked you in the forest was not an ordinary animal," Lyra began. "It was a person, like myself, like the man who carried you here, capable of taking the shape of a wolf under certain conditions. Our kind has lived alongside humans for longer than most records remember, hidden, careful, avoiding discovery, because the two worlds were never meant to mix easily. What happened to you should not have been possible. A bite from one of us either kills a human outright or fails to change them at all. You are neither dead nor unchanged." Elena stared at her, waiting for some sign that this was an elaborate joke, some trick meant to frighten her further. But Lyra's expression remained calm and serious, and beneath that calm, Elena recognized something that frightened her more than any joke could have: sincerity. "You are saying I am becoming one of you," Elena said slowly. "I am saying your body is changing in ways none of us fully understand yet," Lyra replied. "The healing speed, the strength you likely feel building beneath your skin even now, these are signs of transformation, yes. But there are other signs too. Patterns in the way the change is settling that suggest something more unusual is happening inside you. Something none of us have witnessed in living memory." Elena's hands trembled slightly against the blanket. She thought of her sister, of her small apartment with its unwashed dishes still probably sitting in the sink, of the ordinary life she had left behind on what was supposed to be an ordinary walk home. None of it felt real anymore, and yet the ache in her shoulder, the strange new strength coiled beneath her skin, felt more real than anything had in years. "I do not want this," she whispered. "I understand," Lyra said gently. "Few people would choose it, but wanting it or not will not change what is already happening. What matters now is helping you understand your body as it becomes something new, so that the change does not overwhelm you when it fully arrives." A knock sounded at the door before Elena could respond, and Kane entered without waiting for an invitation, his expression composed but his eyes immediately finding Elena's face, searching it for some sign of how she was handling the truth Lyra had clearly just shared with her. Elena met his gaze and felt, despite everything, a strange flicker of something steady in the middle of all this chaos, an anchor she had not expected to find in a stranger's golden eyes. "You told her," Kane said to Lyra, though it was not quite a question. "She deserved to know," Lyra replied simply. "Better from truth than from confusion." Kane nodded once, accepting this, and moved further into the room, standing near the window with his arms loosely crossed, a posture Elena was beginning to recognize as his default when he was thinking carefully about what to say next. "I imagine you have many questions," he said. "I will answer what I can." "Why did that thing attack me?" Elena asked immediately. "If a bite like this is so rare, why did it happen to me specifically? Was it random?" Kane's jaw tightened slightly. "We do not believe it was random," he admitted. "The rogue who attacked you crossed deep into territory he should not have been able to enter undetected. That alone suggests planning, though we do not yet know his purpose, or who, if anyone, helped him." "Someone wanted this to happen to me," Elena said, the words settling over her like a fresh wave of cold. "Why?" "I am no one. I work at a bookstore. I have never done anything to anyone." "I do not yet know why," Kane said honestly, "but I intend to find out, and I intend to keep you safe while I do." Elena studied him for a long moment, searching his composed face for any hint of deception, any sign that his concern was calculated rather than genuine. She found none, though she was aware enough of her own fear and confusion to know she could not fully trust her own judgment right now. "And if I do not want to stay here?" she asked quietly. "If I want to go home, back to my life, whatever is left of it?" Kane held her gaze steadily. "Then I will not stop you," he said. "But I would ask you to consider the danger of returning to a world unprepared for what your body is becoming, and the danger of leaving before we understand who targeted you and why. If the same forces who orchestrated this attack believe you escaped their plans, they may try again, somewhere far less protected than here." The weight of his words settled uncomfortably in Elena's chest. She thought of her sister's house, her small, ordinary bedroom, the life she desperately wanted back, and understood, with a sinking feeling, that none of it might be safe for her to return to. Not yet. Perhaps not for a long time. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Take whatever time you need," Kane replied, his voice softer than before. "No one here will force your hand." He left shortly after, and Lyra busied herself once more with quiet, practical tasks, giving Elena space to sit with the impossible truth now settled firmly around her like a second skin. Outside the window, the sounds of an unfamiliar community drifted faintly through the glass, voices and footsteps and the distant clang of metal against metal, an entire hidden world going about its business, as though harboring a stranger from beyond its borders, were the most natural thing imaginable. Elena pressed a hand against her aching shoulder and closed her eyes, trying to steady the storm of fear and disbelief churning inside her. Somewhere beneath that fear, faint but unmistakable, she felt something else stirring too, a low, warm pulse of strength that had not been there before the forest, before the bite, before her entire understanding of the world had been quietly and irreversibly rewritten. Later that evening, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion, she rose carefully from the bed for the first time, testing her legs on the cold stone floor. They held her weight easily, more easily than she expected, and she made her way slowly to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to look out over the courtyard below. She saw Kane standing near the training yard, speaking quietly with Felix, his posture tense despite his usual composure. Even from this distance, something about him held her attention, some quiet gravity she could not fully explain. As if sensing her gaze, he glanced up toward the window, and for one brief, charged moment, their eyes met across the darkened courtyard. Elena stepped back quickly, her heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with fear, and let the curtain fall closed, though the image of his golden eyes lingering in the darkness stayed with her long after she finally returned to bed. Morning arrived with a knock softer than Kane's had been, and when Elena opened her eyes she found Lyra already awake, preparing a tray of simple food, bread, fruit, and a warm broth that smelled faintly of herbs Elena did not recognize. "You should eat," Lyra said. "Your body is using more energy than you realize, even resting." Elena sat up slowly, testing the strength in her limbs again, and found herself hungrier than she had felt in days. She ate in silence for a while, grateful for the quiet, before curiosity finally overcame her caution. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course," Lyra replied. "What are you exactly? Not human. Not like the creature that attacked me either, since you look completely ordinary right now." Lyra smiled faintly, the first real warmth Elena had seen from her since waking. "We are the same kind," she said. "Every person you have met since arriving here can take the shape you saw in the forest, myself included, though most of us choose our human form far more often than not. It is simply easier to live this way, especially in a world where humans have long since stopped believing creatures like us exist outside of old stories." "How many of you are there?" Elena asked. "Enough to fill this valley and several others beyond it," Lyra said. "We call ourselves a pack, and Kane is our alpha, which means he carries responsibility for every life within these borders, human or otherwise. It is not a position many could bear for as long as he has." Elena considered this, turning the broth spoon absently in her hands. "He seems," she paused, searching for the right word, "careful." "He has had to be," Lyra said simply. "Leadership among our kind is rarely peaceful. Challenges to authority happen more often than outsiders would expect, and Kane has held his position through more difficulty than most rulers ever face. It has made him cautious, yes, but it has also made him fair, more fair than many who came before him." A comfortable silence settled between them as Elena finished her meal, her mind slowly working through everything she had learned in the past few days. The idea of an entire hidden community, structured with its own leadership and rules and dangers, still felt impossibly large to accept, and yet sitting here, in this quiet room with morning light spilling gently across the stone floor, it also felt strangely, undeniably real. Later that day, Lyra allowed her to walk beyond the healer's quarters for the first time, moving slowly through a narrow stone corridor that opened into a wide courtyard bustling with quiet activity. Elena kept close to Lyra's side, acutely aware of the curious glances following her, some wary, some openly hostile, though most simply watchful, as though the entire community were still deciding what to make of her presence among them. Near the far end of the courtyard, a group of younger pack members sparred with wooden training weapons under the watchful eye of an older instructor, their movements fast and precise, in a way that reminded Elena uncomfortably of the speed with which the creature in the forest had closed the distance between them. She slowed her steps, and Lyra, noticing her hesitation, guided her gently toward a quieter path along the edge of the courtyard instead. "It will take time to feel steady here," Lyra said. "No one expects otherwise." They rounded a corner and nearly collided with Mara, who stood waiting with her arms crossed, and an expression that made clear the meeting was not accidental. Up close, Elena felt an immediate, instinctive wariness toward her, though she could not have explained exactly why. "So this is our guest," Mara said, her gaze sweeping over Elena with cool assessment. "The council has heard a great deal about you, though strangely, we have yet to hear anything directly from Kane about his plans regarding your presence here." Lyra's posture stiffened slightly beside her. "Mara, this is not the time." "On the contrary," Mara said smoothly, "I believe it is exactly the time." She turned her attention fully to Elena. "Tell me, do you understand what is happening to you? Do you understand what your presence in this territory could mean for the rest of us, human girl?" Elena straightened her shoulders despite the unease coiling in her stomach. "I understand that none of this was my choice," she said evenly, "and I understand that I would like to be left alone to figure it out, without being treated like a threat by someone I have never met." Something flickered across Mara's expression, surprise perhaps, or grudging respect, though it vanished quickly behind her composed mask. "We shall see how alone you remain once the council finishes its deliberations," she said, before turning and walking away without another word, leaving a heavy silence in her wake. Lyra exhaled slowly once Mara was out of earshot. "Do not let her unsettle you," she said. "Mara has her own ambitions, and she rarely misses an opportunity to challenge decisions Kane makes without her approval." Elena nodded. Though the encounter left a lingering unease she could not easily shake. A reminder that whatever safety Kane had promised her existed within a much larger, more complicated web of politics and rivalry she barely understood. As they made their way back toward the healer's quarters, she found herself glancing instinctively toward the training yard once more, half hoping, half dreading, to catch sight of Kane again, and feeling a strange twist of disappointment when she did not. A week passed before the change truly began to show itself, and when it did, it arrived without warning, in the middle of an otherwise ordinary afternoon. Elena had been sitting near the window of the healer's quarters, watching sunlight move slowly across the stone floor, when a sudden wave of heat swept through her body, so intense that she gasped and clutched at the edge of the bed for support. Lyra was at her side instantly, gripping her shoulders, her sharp eyes scanning Elena's face with practiced urgency. "Breathe through it," she said firmly. "Do not fight it, whatever you feel. Fighting only makes it worse." Elena tried to obey, drawing in ragged breaths as the heat spread outward from her shoulder, down through her arms and legs, pooling low in her stomach, like something coiling tight before release. Her vision blurred at the edges, and for a moment the entire room seemed to tilt sideways, sounds sharpening unnaturally, the distant birdsong outside suddenly loud enough to make her wince. "What is happening?" she managed between gritted teeth. "Your body is settling into what it is becoming," Lyra said. "This has been building since the night you were bitten. It will pass." The wave crested and finally began to recede, leaving Elena trembling and drenched in sweat, her heartbeat slowly returning to something closer to normal. She sagged back against the pillows, exhausted in a way that felt different from ordinary tiredness, as though something inside her had shifted permanently into a new configuration. When she finally found the strength to look down at her own hands, she noticed faint lines tracing along her forearm, pale and silvery, similar to the marks Lyra had shown her days earlier near the original wound, except now they extended further, branching delicately like frost across a window pane. Lyra leaned closer, examining the marks with open fascination. "These were not here yesterday," she murmured. "They are spreading." "Is that normal?" Elena asked, alarm creeping back into her voice. "I do not know," Lyra admitted honestly. "I have never seen a transformation produce anything like this. Whatever your body is becoming, it is unlike anything documented in our records." Word of the new development reached Kane within the hour, delivered by a nervous young attendant, who clearly did not relish the task of interrupting the king during a council session. Kane excused himself immediately, his measured stride carrying him quickly through the halls toward the healer's quarters, where he found Elena sitting upright, staring at her own marked arm, with an expression caught somewhere between fear and reluctant fascination. She looked up as he entered, and something passed between them, unspoken but unmistakable, an acknowledgement that whatever was happening to her body was moving into territory neither of them fully understood. "May I see?" Kane asked quietly, gesturing toward her arm. Elena hesitated only briefly before extending it toward him. He studied the marks closely, careful not to touch unless necessary, his brow furrowed in concentration. Up close, Elena could see faint flecks of something almost luminous within the pale gold of his eyes, and she found herself unexpectedly aware of how near he was, how steady his presence felt despite the uncertainty swirling around them both. "These match a description I found in an old record," he said slowly, "though I confess I did not fully believe it applied to you until now." "What kind of description?" Elena asked. Kane straightened, choosing his words carefully. "There is a very old story among our people, more legend than history at this point, about a bloodline capable of surviving a bite without fully becoming what the bite normally creates. The story describes marks exactly like these, though the details have been lost or distorted over generations of retelling." "What does it mean for someone to carry that bloodline?" Elena pressed. "I do not know," Kane admitted. "The records I found were incomplete, but if the old story holds any truth, it suggests you may become something between human and wolf, neither fully one nor the other, with abilities that neither side fully possesses on its own." Elena absorbed this in silence, staring down again at the delicate silver lines tracing her skin, A part of her wanted desperately to dismiss all of this as some elaborate misunderstanding, wanted to believe that any day now she would wake up back in her own bed with nothing more than a strange dream to explain away. But the marks on her arm were undeniably real as the strength she could feel building steadily beneath her skin, as real as the sharpened senses that made every sound and scent around her feel almost overwhelming. "I did not ask for any of this," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. "I know," Kane said, his voice gentler than she had heard it before, "and I am sorry that you were pulled into something so far beyond anything you could have prepared for. But I promise you, whatever you become, you will not face it without support. You have my word." Something in the sincerity of his tone settled some of the panic churning inside her, though it did little to answer the deeper questions still hanging unresolved between them. Who had orchestrated the attack? Why had the rogue targeted her specifically? And what exactly did it mean that her body seemed to be following some ancient pattern no one alive had actually witnessed before? Over the following days, the marks continued to spread slowly across her body, following no pattern Lyra could predict, appearing overnight in new places, faint and delicate, almost beautiful, in a way that unsettled Elena as much as it fascinated her. Alongside the marks came other changes too. Her senses sharpened further, until she could hear conversations happening rooms away, could smell the difference between fresh bread and bread baked hours earlier, could see clearly, even in near total darkness. With the changes came something else as well, something Elena struggled to name at first. A restlessness beneath her skin, a coiled energy that made sitting still for long periods feel increasingly unbearable. Lyra, recognizing the signs, began allowing her short walks around the training yard each morning, always accompanied, always careful, though even these brief excursions left Elena feeling more alive than she had in weeks. It was during one such morning walk that she first witnessed Kane in his other form. She had wandered slightly ahead of Lyra, drawn by movement near the far edge of the training yard, and rounded a stone wall just in time to see a massive wolf, fur dark as shadow beneath the morning light, pacing the length of an open field with fluid, powerful grace. She froze instantly, old fear flooding back through her chest, memories of the forest crashing over her in an unwelcome wave. The wolf stopped, sensing her presence, and turned its head toward her. For one long, breathless moment, Elena stared into eyes the exact same pale gold she had come to recognize, and understood, with a jolt that stole the air from her lungs, that she was looking at Kane. The transformation back to human form happened quickly, fluid and almost gentle compared to the violence of the creature that had attacked her weeks earlier, until Kane stood before her once more in his familiar shape, his expression carefully neutral despite the faint tension in his shoulders. "I did not mean to startle you," he said. Elena's heart was still pounding, though she forced herself to breathe evenly, reminding herself firmly that this was not the same creature from the forest, that the danger she associated with that shape did not belong to the man standing before her now. "It is fine," she managed. "I just was not expecting to see it that way." Kane studied her carefully, gauging her reaction with quiet attentiveness. "It will not always frighten you this way," he said gently. "In time, you may come to understand this shape as something other than a threat. Perhaps, eventually, as something closer to home." Elena did not respond immediately, her gaze drifting toward the empty field where the wolf had been pacing only moments before, and found herself, despite the lingering fear still coiled in her chest, unexpectedly curious about what that transformation might eventually mean for her own changing body, and whether the same golden eyes she had grown so unexpectedly attached to might one day belong to a version of herself she had not yet begun to imagine. That evening, the council summoned Kane to address growing concerns about Elena's continued presence within Ashbourne's walls, and this time, to Mara's evident satisfaction, they insisted that Elena herself be present as well. Elena stood at the edge of the great hall, flanked loosely by Lyra, watching the flickering torchlight cast long shadows across the stern faces of the council members seated along the raised dais. "We have allowed this situation to continue, without proper oversight for too long," Mara said, rising from her seat with practiced authority. "This woman carries marks none of us can explain, marks that may signal something dangerous, something we do not fully understand. I move that she be relocated to a more contained location, until the council can determine the full extent of the risk she poses." Murmurs rippled through the gathered onlookers, and Elena felt her pulse quicken, old fear resurfacing at the thought of being locked away somewhere isolated, treated as a danger rather than a person. She glanced instinctively toward Kane, who stood near the center of the hall, his expression carefully composed despite the tension visible in the set of his jaw. "The council does not decide matters concerning individuals under my direct protection," Kane said evenly, his voice carrying easily across the hall without needing to be raised. "Elena remains under my authority, and I have seen nothing in her behavior that suggests danger to this pack. You have seen marks appearing across her body that match descriptions from records older than this stronghold itself," Mara countered sharply. "Records that speak of transformations capable of disrupting the natural order of our kind. Are we to simply ignore such warnings because our king has taken a personal interest in this human?" A tense silence followed her words, thick with implication. Kane's gaze hardened slightly, though his voice remained level. "My personal interest, as you put it, has no bearing on my judgment regarding the safety of this territory. Elena has done nothing to threaten anyone here. If you wish to challenge my authority directly, Mara, I suggest you do so plainly, rather than hiding behind concern for a stranger you have shown no genuine concern for until now." Mara's expression flickered, caught between frustration and calculation, before she inclined her head slightly, retreating from open confrontation, while clearly unwilling to fully abandon her position. "I only wish to protect this pack," she said smoothly, "as we all do." The older council member who had spoken calmly in Elena's defense days earlier rose slightly from his seat. "Perhaps a compromise," he suggested. "Allow the girl to remain under Kane's protection, but require regular reports on her condition to the full council, so that we may monitor developments together, rather than through rumor and speculation alone." After a long pause, Kane nodded once, accepting the compromise with visible reluctance. "Reports will be provided," he said, "but I will not have her treated as a prisoner within these walls. She is a guest, and she will be treated as one." The council session ended shortly after, the tension in the hall slowly dissolving as members filed out in low conversation, though Elena could feel curious and wary glances trailing after her long after the doors had closed. Lyra guided her quickly back toward the healer's quarters, offering quiet reassurances along the way, though Elena barely heard them, her mind still replaying the sharp edge in Mara's voice, the barely concealed hostility beneath her polished words. "She does not like me," Elena said once they were alone again. "Mara does not trust easily, and trusts outsiders least of all," Lyra replied. "But do not let her unsettle you more than necessary. Kane will not allow the council to overrule his protection of you, whatever their concerns." "Why does she dislike him having authority over this so much?" Elena asked. "There is something more there, is not there? Something personal." Lyra hesitated, weighing how much to share. "Mara's family has long believed her bloodline should hold greater influence within Ashbourne's leadership," she said finally. "She has challenged Kane's decisions before, though rarely so openly. Your presence here has simply given her a new opportunity to press that old ambition forward." Elena absorbed this quietly, understanding now that she had unknowingly stepped into the middle of tensions that extended far beyond her own circumstances, political currents that had existed long before she ever wandered into that fateful stretch of forest. The realization did little to ease her anxiety, though it did shift her fear into something closer to caution, an awareness that survival here would require more than simply enduring her own transformation. Later that night, unable to settle despite her exhaustion, Elena made her way quietly out into the courtyard, drawn by the cool night air and the need to clear her thoughts. She found Kane there already, standing near the low stone wall overlooking the valley beyond, his gaze fixed on the distant tree line where the forest met the edge of Ashbourne's protected land. "I did not expect anyone else to be awake," she said softly, approaching carefully. Kane glanced toward her, something in his expression softening slightly at the sight of her. "I rarely sleep well when the council raises new complications," he admitted. "Old habit." Elena moved to stand beside him, close enough to feel the quiet warmth radiating from him despite the cold night air. "I am sorry," she said, "for the trouble my presence seems to be causing you." "You have caused no trouble," Kane said firmly. "Mara would find reasons to challenge my decisions, regardless of what circumstance provided the opportunity. Do not carry guilt that belongs to someone else's ambition." They stood together in comfortable silence for a while, the vast quiet of the valley stretching out before them, under a sky thick with stars, far brighter than anything Elena had ever seen back home. She found herself unexpectedly grateful for his presence, steady and calm beside the chaos of everything else swirling around her, and could not help but notice, again, how easily her guard lowered whenever he was near. "Do you regret bringing me here?" she asked quietly, half afraid of the answer. Kane turned to face her fully, his golden eyes catching what little light the stars offered, steady and sincere, in a way that made her breath catch slightly. "No," he said simply. "Whatever complications your presence has brought, I do not regret the choice to save your life that morning, and I do not believe I ever will." Something warm and unfamiliar unfurled in Elena's chest at his words, a feeling she was not yet ready to name, tangled as it was with fear and uncertainty, and the strange, undeniable pull she felt toward him, despite everything working to keep them apart. She looked away first, toward the dark tree line beyond the valley, and wondered, not for the first time, what other secrets that forest still held, and how much more of her old life she would have to release before she could fully understand the new one taking shape around her. The following weeks brought a strange kind of routine to Elena's days, one built around healing sessions with Lyra, cautious walks through the training yard, and small, quiet conversations with Kane that seemed to happen more often than either of them openly acknowledged. The silver marks continued spreading slowly across her body, and with them came new abilities that startled her each time they surfaced, a sudden burst of speed while walking, the ability to hear a conversation happening 2 rooms away, eyes that adjusted instantly to darkness without any conscious effort on her part. One morning, while practicing simple balance exercises Lyra had suggested to help her adjust to her sharpened senses, Elena felt a familiar wave of heat rise through her chest, though weaker this time, more controlled. She closed her eyes, breathing through it the way Lyra had taught her, and when she opened them again, she noticed her own reflection in the polished metal surface of a nearby basin, looked subtly different, her eyes catching the light with a faint golden shimmer she had never seen in them before. "Lyra," she called, alarmed. Lyra hurried over, examining her closely, before a slow smile spread across her face, the first genuine smile Elena had seen from her in days. "This is remarkable," Lyra said softly. "Your eyes are beginning to reflect traits typically only seen in those who have fully completed the transformation, yet you show none of the instability that usually accompanies such an early shift." "What does that mean?" Elena asked, part fascinated, part unsettled. "It means whatever you are becoming continues to defy everything we understand about how this process usually works," Lyra said. "And it means, I suspect, that Kane will want to see this himself." News of the change spread quickly, and within the hour, Kane arrived at the healer's quarters, his expression carefully composed, though Elena had learned by now to recognize the subtle tightness around his eyes, that meant he was more concerned than he wanted to show. He studied her eyes closely, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath, close enough that her pulse quickened, for reasons that had little to do with fear. "This confirms what I suspected from the old records," he said quietly. "Your body is not simply adopting traits of a normal-turned wolf. It is developing something closer to what the old story described, an entirely new balance between human and wolf nature." "Is that dangerous?" Elena asked. "I do not know yet," Kane admitted honestly. "But I intend to make certain you have every resource available to understand and control whatever you are becoming, rather than being overwhelmed by it." Over the following days, Kane began personally overseeing part of her training, teaching her simple methods of grounding herself when the sensory overwhelm became too intense, showing her breathing techniques used by young pack members struggling to control their first transformations. Elena found herself looking forward to these sessions more than she wanted to admit, drawn not only by the practical guidance he offered, but by the quiet, steady presence he brought with him, a calm she had not realized she needed until she found it. During one such session, held in a quiet corner of the training yard away from curious onlookers, Elena successfully controlled a surge of heat that would have overwhelmed her only weeks earlier, breathing through it steadily until it settled into something manageable rather than something that controlled her. "You are progressing faster than anyone expected," Kane said, genuine approval evident in his voice. "I had a good teacher," Elena replied, surprising herself with the lightness in her own tone, a small flicker of humor she had not felt capable of since the attack. Kane's expression softened into something rare and unguarded, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth that transformed his usually composed features into something far more human, far more approachable. They stood together for a moment longer than necessary, the easy warmth between them stretching comfortably into something neither seemed eager to break, until the sound of approaching footsteps pulled them both back to awareness. Felix appeared at the edge of the training yard, his expression grim enough that whatever warmth had settled between Kane and Elena evaporated instantly. "We have a problem," Felix said. "Tracks near the eastern boundary again. Fresh ones. He is back." Kane's entire posture shifted, the calm teacher vanishing instantly, replaced by the sharp, focused authority of a leader facing renewed threat. Elena felt a cold knot form in her stomach, memories of the forest crashing back with sudden vivid force. "The rogue," she said quietly. Kane's jaw tightened. "It appears so." He turned to Elena, his expression softening only slightly despite the urgency clearly pressing on him. "Stay close to Lyra until I return. Do not leave the stronghold grounds for any reason." Elena nodded, though the fear coiling through her chest made it difficult to find her voice. As Kane and Felix strode away to gather a search party, she remained standing alone in the training yard, staring toward the distant tree line where danger, apparently, had never truly left, only waited patiently for the right moment to return. Kane and Felix led a small group of trusted fighters toward the eastern boundary, moving swiftly and silently through the trees, following a trail of broken branches and disturbed earth that grew fresher with every mile. The scent Kane had caught weeks earlier on the morning he found Elena returned now, sharper and more distinct, unmistakably the same rogue who had crossed into their territory before. They found him near an old stone marker at the edge of Ashbourne's boundary, standing in human form, waiting with the calm confidence of someone who had planned this meeting rather than been caught by surprise. He was tall, with sharp features, and cold eyes that studied Kane's approaching group without a trace of fear. "Damon," Kane said, recognition flashing across his face, hardening instantly into open hostility. "I should have known." "Kane," Damon replied smoothly, a thin smile curling at the edge of his mouth. "It has been a long time since you last chased me off your land. I am impressed you finally caught my trail again." "You attacked an innocent human," Kane said, his voice low and dangerous. "Explain yourself. Before I decide explanations no longer matter." Damon's smile widened slightly, unbothered by the threat. "Innocent," he repeated, amused. "Is that truly what you believe she is? Tell me, Kane, has your little healer discovered yet exactly what bloodline runs through her veins?" Kane's expression flickered, and Felix stepped subtly closer to his side, sensing the shift in tension. "What do you know about her bloodline?" Kane demanded. "More than you, apparently," Damon said. "Her family carries an old inheritance, one your ancestors buried deep enough that even you failed to recognize it until her body began showing the signs. I merely helped that inheritance along a little sooner than it might have surfaced naturally." "You deliberately targeted her," Felix said, disbelief and anger coloring his voice. "Why?" "Because bloodlines like hers do not belong scattered loose in the human world. Unclaimed and unprotected," Damon said, his tone shifting subtly, something colder and more calculating beneath the casual surface. "There are those who would pay a great deal to control what she is becoming. I merely intended to collect her quietly, before anyone else discovered her value. Your patrol interrupted my plans rather inconveniently, Kane." Kane's control snapped taut, fury simmering beneath his composed exterior. "You will not touch her again," he said, voice low and absolute. "Whatever claim you believe you have over her fate ends here." Damon studied him for a long moment, something calculating flickering behind his cold eyes. "That protective tone," he said softly, almost thoughtfully. "Careful, Kane. That sounds like more than simple duty." Before Kane could respond, Damon stepped back smoothly toward the tree line, his form beginning to shift, fur rippling across his skin as his shape transformed with practiced ease. "Consider this a warning," he said, his voice already deepening into something closer to a growl. "Those I answer to will not give up so easily. Keep her close, Alpha King. You will need every advantage you can gather." With that, he vanished into the trees, moving with a speed that made pursuit nearly impossible, though Kane and Felix gave chase regardless, crashing through the underbrush until the trail finally went cold, near a rocky outcrop far beyond Ashbourne's protected boundary. Kane stood breathing hard, fury and frustration warring visibly across his features, while Felix caught up beside him, equally winded. "He got away again," Felix said grimly. "For now," Kane replied, his voice tight with restrained anger. "But now we know this was never random. Someone is hunting her deliberately, and Damon is only their instrument. We need to tell the council," Felix said carefully. "This changes everything." Kane's expression darkened further. "It changes nothing about my intention to protect her," he said. "But you are right that the council must know the full danger now facing this territory." He paused, glancing back toward the direction of Ashbourne, his thoughts clearly already racing ahead toward the difficult conversation waiting for him there. "Elena deserves to know as well," he added quietly. "All of it, however difficult the truth may be to hear." They made their way back toward the stronghold in tense silence, the weight of Damon's revelations settling heavily over both of them, while behind them, the forest returned to its usual quiet stillness, giving no further hint of the danger that had just slipped away into its shadows, patient and waiting for its next opportunity. Kane found Elena exactly where he had left her, though hours had passed since he departed with the search party. She sat near the low stone wall of the training yard, wrapped in a heavy shawl Lyra had insisted she wear against the cooling evening air, her eyes fixed anxiously on the tree line, as though she could will him back into sight through sheer force of worry. She rose the moment she saw him approaching, relief flooding her features before quickly giving way to concern at the grim set of his expression. "You found him," she said. It was not quite a question. "We spoke with him," Kane replied carefully, "and I think it is best if we speak somewhere private." He led her to a quiet room adjoining his study, away from curious ears, and once the door was closed behind them, he relayed everything Damon had revealed, watching her face carefully as understanding, then horror, settled over her features. "Someone wanted this to happen to me," she said slowly, the same words she had spoken weeks earlier, now carrying far heavier weight than before, deliberately, because of some bloodline I did not even know I had. "I am sorry," Kane said quietly. "I wish I had answers that made this easier to bear." Elena sank into the chair near his desk, her hands trembling slightly as she processed the enormity of what he had just told her. "My whole life," she said, "my family, we were just ordinary people. My parents ran a small shop. My sister works at a school. None of us ever showed any sign of," she gestured vaguely at herself, "of any of this. Sometimes bloodlines remain dormant for many generations before surfacing again," Kane said gently. "It is possible your family carried this inheritance without ever knowing it themselves, until circumstance and, apparently, someone else's deliberate interference brought it forward in you." Elena pressed her palms against her eyes, overwhelmed by the accumulating weight of everything she had learned since waking in this strange hidden world. "Why would anyone want to control what I am becoming?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly. "What could possibly make that worth so much effort?" Kane moved closer, kneeling beside her chair so that their eyes met at level, his expression softening from the hardened fury she had glimpsed when he first returned. "I do not fully know yet," he admitted honestly, "but I promise you, whatever answers exist, we will find them together. You are not facing this alone." Something in his steady, unwavering presence broke through the fear gripping her chest, and before she fully understood what she was doing, Elena reached out and gripped his hand tightly, kneading the physical anchor of his warmth against the storm of uncertainty swirling inside her. Kane did not pull away. Instead, his fingers curled gently around hers, steady and grounding, and for a long moment neither of them spoke, simply sitting together in the quiet acknowledgement of everything unfolding around them. "Kane," she said softly, "why does this matter so much to you? I am a stranger, a complication, by your own counsel's account. Why go to such lengths for someone you barely know?" Kane held her gaze, something vulnerable flickering behind his usually composed expression, a rare crack in the careful control he maintained around everyone else. "I have asked myself that same question many times since the morning I found you in the forest," he admitted quietly. "I do not have a simple answer, but something about your presence unsettled the careful balance I have maintained for a long time, and despite every instinct urging caution, I find myself unwilling to let anything happen to you." Elena's breath caught, the sincerity in his voice settling somewhere deep and unguarded inside her chest. Before she could respond, A strange warmth began building behind her eyes, faint at first, then rapidly intensifying, and she gasped softly as her vision sharpened dramatically, colors and shadows suddenly vivid in a way she had never experienced before. "Kane," she said, alarmed, "something is happening." He looked at her closely, and his own breath caught sharply as he watched her eyes shift, the pale gold beginning to spread and brighten until they matched, almost exactly, the shade of his own. But it was not only her eyes that reacted. As their gazes remained locked together, Kane felt something stir deep within himself, an old, rare response he had read about in ancient records but never personally experienced, his own eyes flaring suddenly with a brightness beyond their usual color, golden light flickering visibly in the dim room. Elena stared at him, stunned. "Your eyes," she whispered. "What is happening?" Kane sat back slightly, equally shaken, understanding dawning slowly across his features, as old, half-remembered lore clicked suddenly into painful clarity. "This reaction," he said slowly, "is not something that happens randomly. It happens only between those bound by something far deeper than simple attraction or circumstance." "What does that mean?" Elena asked, though some instinctive part of her already suspected the answer before he spoke it aloud. "It means," Kane said quietly, his voice rough with an emotion he clearly had not expected to confront so soon, "that some part of me recognized something in you long before either of us understood why. Among our kind, this reaction is exceedingly rare. It signals a bond deeper than choice, deeper than simple compatibility. It signals fate itself has intervened." Elena sat frozen, the weight of his words settling slowly through her already overwhelmed mind. "Are you saying," she began carefully, "that you and I are," she struggled to find the word, "that we are meant for each other somehow?" "I am saying that is what the old stories claim this reaction means," Kane said carefully, "though I confess I never expected to witness it myself, let alone with a human whose very existence has already upended everything I thought I understood about the natural order of things." The room fell into charged silence, both of them staring at each other, with eyes that shone the exact same impossible gold, caught between fear and wonder, and a connection neither had chosen but neither, in this quiet, unguarded moment, seemed willing to deny. News of the shared golden light spread through Ashbourne with astonishing speed, whispered from guard to servant to council member until, by the following morning, the entire stronghold seemed to already know what only a handful of people had actually witnessed. Elena felt the weight of curious stares wherever she walked, some filled with wonder, others with open suspicion, and she found herself retreating more often to the quiet privacy of the healer's quarters, simply to escape the constant attention. Lyra, for her part, seemed unusually thoughtful in the days following the incident, spending long hours poring over old texts pulled from the deepest shelves of the stronghold's archive, occasionally muttering to herself as she cross-referenced passages Elena could not begin to understand. Finally, on the third day, Lyra called both Elena and Kane into the archive room, several ancient books spread open across a long wooden table. "I believe I have found what we are looking for," Lyra said, though her expression remained cautious rather than triumphant. "This account is older than anything else in our records, written during a time when our kind and humans lived far closer together than they do now." She pointed to a passage, translating slowly from old, faded script. "It speaks of a lineage called the Unbroken, humans who, when bitten under specific rare conditions, would not fully transform, but instead develop a unique balance between both natures. According to this account, the Unbroken were considered vital to maintaining harmony between packs during times of great conflict, capable of bridging both worlds in ways neither side could achieve alone." Elena leaned forward, studying the faded illustration accompanying the text, a figure marked with delicate silver lines remarkably similar to her own. "Does it say what happened to them?" she asked. "Where did this bloodline go?" Lyra's expression grew somber. "The record grows fragmented here, but it suggests the Unbroken became targets during a period of war between rival territories, hunted specifically because whichever side controlled one could gain significant advantage in negotiating or breaking alliances between opposing packs. Eventually, to protect the bloodline, the surviving Unbroken were hidden among human populations, their heritage deliberately buried and forgotten, generation after generation, until even they no longer remembered what they carried within them." Kane's jaw tightened as understanding settled fully across his features. That is why Damon targeted her specifically, he said. If word has spread that an unbroken bloodline has resurfaced, every faction seeking advantage over rival packs would want to control her, whether by force or by more subtle means. Elena felt a fresh wave of unease settle over her, the enormity of her situation expanding further with every new revelation. So I am not just caught between human and wolf, she said slowly. I am something people are willing to fight over. It appears so, Kane said grimly. Which means protecting you has become considerably more urgent than I initially understood. Lyra closed the old book carefully, her expression thoughtful. There is something else worth noting, she said. The record suggests the Unbroken, once their transformation fully settled, developed abilities beyond simple strength or speed. Some accounts describe an ability to sense deception, to calm conflict between hostile parties, even, in rare cases, to temporarily suppress the more volatile instincts of those around them. If true, Elena's presence here could prove valuable, well beyond the political complications her existence creates. Kane considered this carefully, his gaze drifting toward Elena with something like renewed determination. Then we ensure she has every opportunity to fully understand and develop whatever abilities she carries, he said, not as a tool for anyone else's advantage, but as something entirely her own to command. Elena appreciated the sentiment, though the weight of everything she had just learned left little room for immediate comfort. I do not know if I am ready for any of this, she admitted quietly. I did not ask to be important. I did not ask to be hunted, or bonded, or turned into something out of an old legend nobody quite remembers correctly. Kane moved closer, his voice softening. No one is asking you to be ready immediately, he said, only to take each step as it comes, with people around you who will not let you face it alone. Elena managed a faint, tired smile at that, grateful, despite everything, for the steady reassurance in his voice. Their eyes met briefly, and though neither flared gold this time, something quieter and equally significant passed between them, an understanding built not on sudden fated recognition, but on the slow, deliberate trust they had been building since the very first night he carried her unconscious through Ashbourne's gates. That evening, alone in her room, Elena finally allowed herself to fully absorb everything the day had revealed. She stood before the small mirror Lyra had provided, studying her own reflection carefully, the delicate silver marks now tracing gracefully along her collarbone and down one arm, her eyes still holding a faint golden shimmer, even in her calmest moments. The woman staring back at her looked less and less like the ordinary bookstore worker who had walked into those woods weeks earlier, and more like someone entirely new, someone still taking shape, still deciding exactly what kind of strength she intended to carry forward into whatever challenges still lay ahead. She thought of Damon's cold, calculating eyes, of Mara's thinly veiled hostility, of the ancient bloodline now apparently resting entirely within her own uncertain hands, and beneath all of it, quiet but unmistakable, she thought of Kane, of his steady presence, his golden eyes, the bond neither of them had chosen but which now, undeniably, connected them both. Whatever came next, she realized, she would not be facing it as the helpless woman who had once fled through dark trees, but as someone finally beginning to understand the strength quietly built into every scar, now marking her skin. Nearly a month passed in relative calm, though calm within Ashbourne, Elena had learned, was always a fragile and temporary thing. She continued her training with Kane and select members of his most trusted fighters, her strength and speed growing steadily alongside a clearer understanding of the strange new abilities settling within her. She could sense tension in a room before anyone spoke a word, could feel the subtle shift in someone's intention moments before they acted on it, gifts that Lyra's old records had predicted, but that still startled Elena each time they surfaced clearly. It was during a quiet evening training session, the sky streaked orange with the last light of sunset, that Felix arrived at the training yard with news that shattered the fragile peace they had all begun to grow accustomed to. Damon has been spotted again, Felix said, breathless from running. Close. Inside the boundary this time, not just near it. Kane's entire posture shifted instantly, the relaxed teacher vanishing, replaced by the sharp, alert authority Elena had come to associate with genuine danger. Where? He demanded. Near the old grain stores, close to the eastern residences, Felix said. He was not alone. at least 2 others with him, moving fast, deliberately avoiding the main patrol routes. Kane turned to Elena immediately, his expression torn between the urgency of the threat and clear reluctance to leave her unprotected. "Stay with Lyra," he said firmly. "Do not leave the main hall for any reason until I return." "I want to help," Elena said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her own voice. "I am not the same helpless person you found in that forest anymore, Kane. Let me be useful." Kane hesitated, torn clearly between recognizing the truth in her words and the protective instinct that had guided nearly every decision he made concerning her since the beginning. "This is different from training," he said carefully. "This is real danger, Elena." "I understand that," she replied. "Which is exactly why I do not want to sit safely behind walls while you and everyone else risk yourselves for a threat that exists because of me in the first place." Something in her resolve seemed to convince him, or perhaps he simply recognized, in that moment, that arguing further would waste time they did not have. "Stay close to me," he said finally, "and if I tell you to retreat, you retreat immediately. No arguments." Elena nodded, and together with Felix and a small group of Ashbourne's most capable fighters, they moved swiftly toward the eastern residences, the tension of the coming confrontation thick in the cooling evening air. They found Damon near the grain stores exactly as Felix had described, flanked by 2 others whose cold, calculating expressions matched his own. Villagers had already fled the immediate area, though a few frightened faces still peered from nearby windows, watching the standoff unfold with visible fear. "Kane," Damon said, his tone almost pleasant despite the clear hostility simmering beneath it. "I see you brought your unbroken along this time. Bold choice, considering the circumstances." "You will not touch her," Kane said, his voice low and absolute, echoing the same promise he had made weeks earlier near the boundary stones. Damon's smile widened slightly. "That decision," he said, "may not entirely belong to you anymore." He gestured slightly, and the 2 figures flanking him shifted forward, their postures shifting subtly in preparation for transformation. Elena felt the familiar heat begin building beneath her skin, though this time, rather than fear, she felt something steadier accompany it, a coiled readiness she had been cultivating through weeks of careful training. She glanced toward Kane, who gave the smallest nod of acknowledgement, silent permission and trust, combined into a single gesture. The confrontation erupted swiftly, fighters shifting rapidly into their wolf forms, the air filled suddenly with growls and the sharp sounds of conflict. Elena, remaining in human form as Lyra had suggested she try first, focused everything she had learned, reaching out instinctively with the strange sensing ability that had grown steadily stronger over recent weeks, feeling the intentions of those around her with startling clarity. She sensed one of Damon's companions circling toward Kane's unprotected side and shouted a sharp warning, giving him precious seconds to twist away before sharp claws could connect. Kane's gratitude flashed briefly across his face, even amid the chaos, before he returned fully to the fight, moving with lethal, controlled precision against his opponent. Elena continued using her sensing ability to guide Ashbourne's fighters, calling out warnings, identifying openings, functioning as an unexpected but invaluable anchor amid the swirling conflict. When Damon himself turned his attention toward her, breaking away from his skirmish with Felix to advance directly on her position, Elena felt fear flare briefly through her chest, quickly steadied by the calm determination she had been building for weeks. "You should not have come here, human girl," Damon growled, already beginning his own transformation. "I am not just human anymore," Elena replied, standing her ground, despite every instinct urging retreat. "And I am done being someone people think they can simply take." As Damon lunged, Elena reacted with reflexes she had not fully trusted herself to possess until this exact moment, sidestepping with newfound speed and driving her elbow sharply into his exposed side as he passed, staggering him just enough for Kane, breaking free from his own opponent, to intercept the rest of the attack directly. The fight that followed was fierce but brief, Ashbourne's fighters gradually overwhelming Damon's smaller group through sheer coordinated skill, and Elena's continued warnings guiding their movements. Eventually, recognizing the fight was lost, Damon retreated once more into the trees, his remaining companions following swiftly behind him, leaving Ashbourne's fighters battered but victorious in the settling darkness. Kane found Elena immediately, once the immediate danger had passed, his eyes scanning her quickly for any sign of injury, before pulling her, without hesitation, into a tight embrace that startled them both with its intensity. "You could have been killed," he said, his voice rough with barely controlled emotion. "So could you," Elena replied, her own arms wrapping tightly around him in return, the adrenaline of the fight slowly giving way to something softer, more vulnerable. "We survived it together." Kane pulled back slightly, studying her face with an expression she had never seen quite so openly on him before, something raw and unguarded that matched the steady golden glow still faintly visible in both their eyes. "I am done pretending this bond between us is simply something fate imposed on us without our consent," he said quietly. "Whatever this is, Elena, I choose it. Not because some old legend demands it, but because I want to." Elena's breath caught, warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with fear or transformation. "I choose it too," she said softly. Around them, Ashbourne's fighters began the slow process of regrouping, tending to minor injuries and confirming Damon's retreat, while Kane and Elena remained standing together amid the settling dust of the confrontation, the fragile beginning of something neither fate nor danger could fully claim as their own. The victory over Damon's small group did little to settle the deeper unrest building within Ashbourne's walls. Word of the confrontation reached the council swiftly, and rather than easing Mara's concerns, the news of Elena's direct involvement in the fight only sharpened her opposition further. Within days, Mara had gathered enough support among certain council factions to call for a full assembly, one intended to challenge Kane's continued protection of Elena in the most direct terms yet. The great hall filled quickly on the appointed morning, tension thick enough that Elena could feel it pressing against her skin the moment she entered alongside Kane. Mara stood at the center of the gathered assembly, her expression composed, but her eyes sharp with calculated purpose. "We have tolerated uncertainty long enough," Mara announced, addressing the full council, rather than Kane directly. "This human, whatever bloodline she carries, has already drawn dangerous enemies directly into our territory. Twice now, Ashbourne has faced direct conflict because of her presence. I ask the council formally, how many more confrontations must we endure before we acknowledge the risk she represents?" "The risk exists because someone deliberately targeted her," Kane countered firmly, stepping forward. "Removing her from Ashbourne's protection would not eliminate that danger. It would simply leave her defenseless against forces already proven willing to hunt her regardless of where she resides." "Perhaps," Mara said smoothly, "or perhaps her absence would remove the incentive for these enemies to continue testing our borders at all. I propose the council formally request her departure from Ashbourne, for the safety of this pack as a whole." Murmurs spread through the assembled crowd, some in clear agreement, others visibly uncomfortable with the proposal. Elena felt her pulse quicken, old fear resurfacing despite the strength she had built over recent weeks, though this time it settled into something closer to steady resolve rather than helpless panic. "May I speak?" Elena said, her voice carrying clearly across the hall despite the surprise rippling through the assembly, at a human, addressing the council directly. Kane glanced at her, silent support evident in his expression, and gave a small nod of encouragement. Elena stepped forward, drawing herself up to her full height, meeting Mara's sharp gaze directly without flinching. "I did not ask for any of what has happened to me," she began, her voice steady despite the weight of every eye in the hall fixed upon her. "I did not ask to be attacked, or transformed, or hunted by people seeking to use whatever bloodline I carry for their own advantage. But I have spent every day since that attack learning to understand this new part of myself, not to become a burden on this pack, but to become someone capable of standing alongside it." She paused, glancing briefly at Kane before returning her full attention to the council. "Days ago, during the confrontation with Damon, I did not hide behind Ashbourne's fighters. I stood beside them, and my abilities helped protect people who owed me nothing beyond the shelter they had already generously provided. I am not asking for your trust freely given. I am asking for the chance to earn it, the same way anyone else within these walls has had the chance to earn their place." Silence followed her words, heavy and considering, until the older council member who had defended her weeks earlier rose slowly from his seat. "I, for one, believe the girl has already demonstrated more courage and commitment to this pack's safety than many born within these walls," he said. "I move that the council reject Mara's proposal, and instead formally recognize Elena's contribution to Ashbourne's defense." A ripple of support moved through the assembly, quiet murmurs shifting gradually toward agreement, though Mara's expression remained tight with barely restrained frustration. "This is not merely about her courage," Mara said sharply, attempting to regain control of the discussion. "It is about the fundamental danger her very existence represents to the stability of every pack in the region. Danger that will not simply disappear because she fought bravely in one confrontation." Before further debate could unfold, the great hall doors burst open suddenly, a breathless scout rushing in with urgent news that silenced the assembly instantly. "A large force approaches from the eastern boundary," the scout gasped. "Not a small group like before. An organized army, moving with clear intention toward Ashbourne's borders." Kane's expression hardened instantly into sharp, focused command. "Numbers," he demanded. "At least 50, the scout replied. "Possibly more. They move with the coordination of a trained force, not scattered rogues." Whispers of alarm spread rapidly through the hall, the council's political debate instantly forgotten in the face of far more immediate danger. Kane turned to Felix, already issuing rapid commands to mobilize Ashbourne's full defense, before turning back to the assembled council with grim resolve. "Whatever disagreements remain unresolved among us," he said firmly, "they will wait until Ashbourne's safety is secured. Every fighter capable of defending these walls, prepare immediately." The hall erupted into swift, organized motion, council members and onlookers alike moving quickly to fulfill their roles in the sudden crisis. Elena felt her heart pounding, not with the old helpless fear of the forest, but with a fierce, steady determination that surprised her with its intensity. Whatever force approached Ashbourne's borders, she understood instinctively, was connected directly to the danger surrounding her own bloodline, and she had no intention of hiding safely behind stone walls while others fought a battle that existed, at least in part, because of her. "I am fighting alongside you," she said firmly to Kane, as he turned to organize the defense. Kane studied her for a long moment, old protective instinct warring visibly, with growing respect for the strength she had proven repeatedly over recent weeks. "Stay close to Felix's group," he said finally, a concession rather than a refusal. "And trust your training. You have earned the right to stand in this fight." Together, they moved swiftly toward the gathering defenders, the great hall emptying rapidly behind them, as Ashbourne prepared to face whatever force now approached its borders, the fragile peace of recent weeks shattering completely under the weight of a threat far larger than anything they had yet encountered. Ashbourne's defenders gathered swiftly along the eastern boundary as the approaching force came into view beneath the pale light of early evening, a disciplined line of fighters moving with the coordinated precision the scout had described. At the front of the opposing force stood a figure Elena recognized immediately, despite the distance: Damon, no longer hiding in shadows or striking from ambush, but standing openly, at the head of an army, clearly gathered for direct confrontation. Beside Kane, Felix studied the opposing line with a grim, assessing eye. "This is no longer a rogue acting alone," he said quietly. "Someone with real resources organized this." Kane's expression remained hard and focused, his golden eyes scanning the approaching force with the calm precision of someone who had faced difficult battles before, and intended to face this one no differently. "Whatever backing Damon has found," he said, "they will discover Ashbourne does not yield its people easily." The two forces drew closer, until finally, at a respectful but tense distance, Damon stepped forward alone, his voice carrying clearly across the open ground between them. "Kane," he called out, "this does not need to end in bloodshed for everyone gathered here. Hand over the unbroken, and my employers have promised your territory will remain untouched. No further conflict, no further losses on either side." Kane's jaw tightened, though his voice remained steady and clear. "You already know my answer, Damon. She is not a bargaining piece to be traded away for convenient peace." "Then this conversation is finished," Damon replied, his expression hardening as he stepped back into the ranks of his gathered force, and the ground itself seemed to hold its breath in the charged silence that followed. The battle that erupted moments later was unlike anything Elena had witnessed before, chaos and motion blurring together as both sides clashed with fierce, desperate intensity. She fought alongside Felix's group exactly as promised, her sharpened senses proving invaluable amid the confusion, calling out warnings, identifying vulnerable openings among their opponents, occasionally stepping directly into combat when circumstances demanded it. her growing strength and speed allowing her to hold her own against opponents who would have easily overwhelmed her only weeks earlier. Across the battlefield, she caught glimpses of Cain fighting with devastating precision, cutting through opposition with the controlled ferocity of a leader defending everything he had sworn to protect. Their eyes met briefly across the chaos, a silent exchange of reassurance and determination passing between them, before both returned fully to the desperate fight surrounding them. The tide of battle shifted gradually, as Ashbourne's superior knowledge of their own territory began to outweigh the numerical advantage Daemon's force had initially held, defenders using the familiar terrain to outmaneuver and separate smaller clusters of opposing fighters. Slowly, steadily, the organized line Daemon had commanded began to fracture under the sustained pressure of Ashbourne's coordinated defense. Recognizing the battle turning against him, Daemon broke away from the main conflict, moving directly toward Elena, with single-minded focus, clearly determined to salvage his original purpose, even as the larger battle slipped from his control. Elena sensed his approach through the chaos and turned to face him directly, steadying herself as he closed the distance between them. "This ends now," Daemon growled, already shifting into his wolf form as he lunged toward her. Elena did not flee this time, the memory of her own helplessness in that first forest encounter replaced entirely by the steady confidence built through weeks of careful training. She sidestepped his initial lunge with practiced precision, reaching deep into the strange sensing ability that had become second nature to her, feeling the exact rhythm of his next movement before he committed to it, and countered with a sharp, decisive strike that staggered him mid-transformation. Cain arrived moments later, breaking away from his own conflict the instant he sensed the danger to Elena, positioning himself protectively at her side, as Daemon recovered, snarling with wounded fury. Together, Cain and Elena faced him, their combined strength and coordination proving more than Daemon alone could overcome. The final exchange happened quickly, Cain's superior strength combined with Elena's precise, sensing-guided strikes overwhelming Daemon's defenses until he finally collapsed, defeated, and unable to continue the fight. Around them, the last remnants of his scattered force began retreating rapidly into the surrounding trees, the battle's outcome now undeniably decided in Ashbourne's favor. In the settling aftermath, as Ashbourne's fighters began the slow process of regrouping and tending to the wounded, Cain knelt briefly beside Daemon's defeated, weakened form, his expression hard but no longer filled with the same consuming fury that had driven him throughout the fight. "Tell whoever sent you," Cain said quietly but firmly, "that Ashbourne's protection over Elena does not end with this battle. It only grows stronger from here." Daemon, too weakened to respond with anything beyond a resentful glare, was taken into custody by Ashbourne's fighters, the immediate threat finally, decisively neutralized. Cain rose and turned immediately to Elena, checking carefully for any injury, before pulling her once more into a tight, relieved embrace. "It is over," he murmured against her hair. "For now," Elena replied softly, though the warmth of his embrace eased much of the lingering tension still coursing through her. In the days that followed, as Ashbourne slowly recovered from the battle, and news of the decisive victory spread throughout the region, Cain called together the full council once more, this time not to defend his decisions, but to formally announce them. Standing before the assembled hall, with Elena at his side, her golden eyes now steady and unwavering, her silver marks visible and unhidden along her collarbone, Cain addressed the gathered council and community, with quiet, absolute conviction. "Elena Hart stands before you today, not as a helpless stranger our territory reluctantly sheltered," he announced, his voice carrying clearly across the silent hall. "She stands as someone who has proven, repeatedly and without hesitation, her courage, her strength, and her unwavering commitment to this pack's safety. I claim her as my bonded mate, and as an equal partner in every responsibility I carry as Ashbourne's alpha." A murmur of approval spread through the gathered crowd, even Mara, though her expression remained carefully guarded, offering no further open objection to the declaration. Elena felt tears gather unexpectedly at the corners of her eyes, not from fear or grief this time, but from the overwhelming realization of exactly how far she had come since that terrifying night in the forest. She thought of the frightened, helpless woman who had fled through dark trees weeks earlier, and understood, with quiet, settled certainty, that she was no longer that person. The scars marking her skin, once a source of fear and confusion, had become instead a quiet testament to everything she had survived and everything she had grown to become. As Cain took her hand before the assembled council, his golden eyes shining steadily alongside her own, Elena finally allowed herself to fully embrace the strange, unexpected path that had brought her here, understanding that whatever challenges still lay ahead, she would face them not as someone helpless and afraid, but as someone whose strength, quietly and completely, now matched the very light shining in the eyes of the Alpha King standing steadfastly beside her.